Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Today we are talking to Mr. Neal Durando of Pilum Press. He is the publisher of a number of books, some of which I've covered on this channel, namely this particular reprint of Skylar Hernstrom Thune's Vision, also in various collections, The Penultimate Men, also including him. He's one of my favorites. He provided me with the contacts for a particular interview I did with J.B. Jackson regarding his book Shagduk, which we can see in the background there right behind him, and a number of others. His current project is Death Flex, which we'll talk about. That is currently going through a little bit of a crowdfunding thing on Indiegogo. Mr. Durando, thank you for joining me.
Oh, thanks for inviting me.
Oh, my pleasure. So, you have a history working in the publishing world yourself, do you not?
Uh, yeah, I worked a couple of years, not long, but long enough. I think
Isn't
all
that always the
told,
case, though?
it was about all 5 years. It was long enough to see how the sausage gets made,
Hmm.
uh, for the good and the bad.
Yeah,
But it was a terrific orientation.
yeah. And now you have your own publishing company, Pilum Press. Where did the conception for that come from?
Um, the I say Pilum because I'm from the West. I think the Brits actually say Pilum. Um, the idea was that this is a Roman lance that was thrown, they
Mhm.
think, into the shields of their enemies, such that their enemies had to put their shields down. So it's a
Yeah,
bit of a
I think,
metaphor.
yeah, I think the idea was that back in the day, they had a real problem with their throwing their short spears and then the enemy picking them up and throwing them right back at you. So they eventually designed them in such a way so that the head would bend at the
That's it.
at the point to make them useless to throw, but also that way they would get into the shields and just increase their weight to the point where it just became useless. And you can
The
imagine what
the
those things
the,
did to
the
people's
imprint
flesh too.
the imprint for our paperback line is Bent Missile Books. So
Oh, there you go. That's perfect. Uh, so going from the wider publishing world to now to your own independent publishing company, how does
mhm.
one actually create their own publishing company from the ground up?
Well, it wasn't me who had the idea. It began variously. I mean, it began in 1992 with a conversation I had at a party with the now director of a publishing company called Breakaway Books, which is sports-oriented books.
Hmm.
We worked at the same company, and we were cursing the darkness rather than lighting the candle. And I remember looking at him and saying, this is the right time. This is the right time to start something. And he did, and I didn't. Um, I went off to graduate school, but I've always remembered that conversation. And he helps me out now and again, more indirectly than just as an example. Uh, about 2000, I want to say 2012. I guess we figure everything in terms of obsolete social media. Uh, well,
Don't we all?
I was part of uh, I had another conversation with Kevin Winkless on Google Plus, and we got to
Ah,
thinking
blessed
about,
Google Plus.
yeah, it was the best.
It worked
Um,
so well, didn't it?
it
Like for
it did.
for the whole OSR crowd, pretty much gathered on that for the longest time before it went kaput.
I'm still in daily contact with probably 10 people I met there. So it was doing something correctly that Facebook just never
Mm,
managed. Anyway, I was talking with Kevin Winkless, and he had some editorial notions, but unlike me, he had a very and still has a very demanding job. So we were looking at print on demand, and I have experience in journals as well as book in trade publishing. So I was thinking, you know, we know a lot of writers. That's all you really need to do, and have an editorial ear for, you know, something that has potential. Because, you know, most things on the face of them are not, even to the people who write them, are not
Necessarily the best thing in the world.
sure. Um, so, you know, when we chatted back and well, let's do an anthology, and for whatever reason, we ended up not going forward. He got involved in his work, and I kept thinking about that. So that was the second conversation. Um, right before COVID came along, Google Plus was also where I met Sky Hernstrom,
Mm-hmm.
and he sent me the first edition of Dune's Vision out of the blue. I just got it in the mail one day, and that book is considerably more polished out of the gate than most of what you see. The the difference between me and someone else who's just beginning as a small press publisher is that I've read a lot of slush. I've read more slush than you can possibly imagine.
I can imagine, yes.
I think but between the journal I worked on and the actual publisher, and when I started, I said, I'm the slush guy now, because that was my dream, was to pull something out of slush. I was the guy you wanted to get to. Came close a couple of times, but that meant looking at about 200 manuscripts a day
That's a lot of
between
sludge to get through.
short fiction and book length manuscripts. So, you know, I only looked at fiction, of course. So there was a lot of stuff that came over the transom as nonfiction. I would pass that on, but you know, you have to be aggressive. You have to want to do that. Otherwise, what happens is, especially if you're writing, as I was at the time, you take all the no's home with you. And by the time you get to your desk, and I wasn't clever enough to write in the morning back then, by the time that you get to your desk, you said no 200 times for, you know, with varying degrees of eloquence.
Usually very eloquent at the start, and by the end, it's just like, no.
Well, yeah,
Big red letters.
There's an aggression curve that goes with your day, but it's not something you want to bring to your desk.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess I've been through that trial by fire. I've seen how agented fiction gets shopped around. You know, part of your duties are to write readers' reports. That it's an interesting job for a young person, because those reader reports are you're saving the editor in chief and the editorial committee time, so they tend to take them pretty seriously. You know, I've rejected stuff that later won the Booker Prize. You know,
well, you know, let's face facts. Just because something wins a prize does not mean it was ever actually good, and vice versa.
And some prizes are better than others. The Booker is one of the better ones, but
well, we can't win them all. It's just
yeah, you know, future Nobel winner, and I shot him down at that company. So anyway, COVID came around. Sky Hernstrom said, "Well, you know, would you look at this with that experience, and you know, go through and edit as you would?" And so I did. And you know, I don't do that sort of thing anymore, unless, you know, I don't have it in me to read slush piles anymore, because it is just too it gets depressing.
It's like the quality assurance, and it's like the QA stuff in video games applied to literature. You're just constantly going through over the same things, just looking for bugs, and it's just like
I expect so, but you know, every line of code doesn't come with a cover letter explaining that the writer is a PhD and yada yada yada, and there are 3 grammatical errors in the cover letter, and the first sentence doesn't parse. And so, you get to the point where you start throwing these things across the room. Um,
If they can't get their cover letter correctly, I mean, that doesn't bode well for the rest.
there's a lot of, I mean, to be a writer is, you have to be halfway between hallucination and I don't know how to characterize it. I'm sure someone's done it more succinctly. It's halfway delusional, halfway hallucinatory, um, and it, and a decent measure of Dutch courage, probably. Um,
Just not too much, because otherwise
yeah,
your writing's gonna suffer even more.
well, the thing is, a solid manuscript really shines out at you.
Mhm.
You'll see figures of diction that you've never seen before. That's, for me, voice is the number one characteristic I
Yeah.
look for. So if the first sentence is delivering a dramatic beat, that is, where there's characters moving around and there are objects impinging on the characters, and probably not for me.
Mhm.
It's probably not for me.
Yeah.
Um,
I think the
it'll
best starting line in any book I ever read that always comes
yeah,
back to me, William Gibson's Neuromancer. The sky
yeah,
above the port was the color of television tuned to a dead channel,
sure.
which
That's
now means
wonderful.
blue, but back
Right.
then it's static and stuff. It's the problem with those kinds of metaphors. They do tend to age a little bit, but that line's just like burned in my brain from the first
Well,
time I
it,
read it.
it doesn't it doesn't age. I was with one of my writers this week. We were looking at I can't give the line. Gibson is quite good. His composition is
Hmm.
quite good, quite striking. The thing is, with striking diction like that, it tends to fade out. You lose in reading.
Hmm.
You tend to lose how special a given sentence might be. I'm pretty autistic about how I read, so I tend, I'll have to read things 3, 4 times before I see larger arcs because I stay right in the sentence, and I'm reading for meter and euphony and strange collocations and also
Yeah.
there's all sorts of things.
Yeah, the
I get very,
craftsmanship of the language itself.
yes, yeah. I would say I don't know, some of the writers who've worked with me, and one of the things I try to do is to be clear in communication, and I have terrible difficulty with it because I tend to think in metaphor as well. Uh, I think of it as pressure, and the
Hmm.
reason why I think of it as pressure, I think of it as pressure on the reader's ear, right? If who Nick Cole
Hmm.
has done the independent science fiction fantasy community great service by putting his videos online, and he's given the best advice I've heard on this is go out to the backyard and read what you've written and listen to it and rewrite it until it parses correctly. And parsing correctly, that means something different to everyone.
Yeah.
You individually will understand when you've gone a phrase too long, or there are too many beats or whatever. I'm not really talking about poetry. I mean, there's poetic qualities to prose. I think for me to really engage with something, it's got to be something special. It can't be just, like I said earlier, it can't be just dramatic beats. It can't be exposition.
Hmm.
Um, I really do believe that information in the form of exposition is the death of narrative. It's you're out of it immediately. You
And you can
you
notice it immediately too, unless you have to be a very, very good writer to be able to sneak exposition in and have the reader not notice. Now that
it's
applies to any kind of narrative, format, whether it's movies or TV or books or anything.
it's the biggest problem with for a popular fiction writer. It
Hmm.
it just is immediately a trouble. Very frequently, you get people who are writing from a background of discursion. They have they've done their world building, right?
Yeah.
And they've done it sincerely, and they really believe in their vision. What
And
they
now they have
don't,
to communicate it somehow.
yeah, but you can't.
Mhm.
You can't once you write it down. It becomes inert. It's information. It's dead to stance.
Yeah. It's the difference
And,
between, reading about a place in an encyclopedia and actually going there. The author has
oh,
already been there, and now he's trying to write down the encyclopedia entry, and you're
yeah,
losing that vividness that is in your head.
that vividness comes from discovery.
Mm.
And the only way to convey discovery is to sneak up on things such that you're surprised yourself,
Mhm.
right? So, I tell my writers to get really far out over their skis. And that means different things to different people. That's one of the reasons why I use metaphors so much, because you get, I love the writer turns around and says, "What the hell are you talking about?" but,
uh,
um,
I can
but
imagine Sky just going, "The hell are you talking about, man?"
no, we get on like gangbusters. Sky and I do.
Yeah. No, I'm just like his particular
Yeah,
delivery, the way he talks. It's just like, yeah, it's like, well, what do you mean by that? It's got a very laid back kind of effect.
he is. He is. Really, quite a singular writer.
Yeah, I mean, I think of modern writers that I've read, within the
Hmm.
last couple of years, he's probably one of my favorites, if not my
Oh,
favorite
really?
of the new,
Yeah.
batch of fantasy writers out there. I mean, like,
Hmm.
I'm sorry, I've yet to read anybody who there's yet to be another guy who, when I hear a book of his, tell a story of his is coming out right now, oh, I have to have it. Like
Mm.
others, I can take a look or wait a bit. His, I have to. I'll say it. He's my favorite current writer.
Well, you'll be pleased to know that he's working on a novel for us,
Yeah,
and
he mentioned that when I interviewed him back in the day, he was starting to work on something like that.
it's very good. I'm going to be as excited as I ever get to get that manuscript. So that's in the works. I don't know when. Um, you know, I'm a nudge. I mean, the internet means that I can call you up and
Mhm.
and hassle you, and
Yeah.
I
Well,
do.
that is something the
Uh,
internet's done. It's made artists far more accessible if they want to, or whether they want to or not, in many ways, to their
well,
public.
it goes both ways. I think some of the wrong things get magnified, of course, but that for us, I think we've got 5 books out now with How to Win at D&D, Jeffro Johnson's short
Mhm.
treatise, which is an excerpt from a longer book. Again, I can't get over how lucky I am to be publishing the books I'm doing. Um, Back in the day, so I pulled, out of those 200 manuscripts a day, there's a writer who really did have some very good chops, and he needed someone to calm him down and show him what was good about his work,
Mhm.
and make some large structural edits. But when you're starting out for the big publishing company, you don't have the power to sign contracts.
Ah,
So you're in this limbo. It's like, well, yeah, man, it's like I want to encourage you, but don't they see your name on the letterhead, and that they sort of swallow hard and think, well, this is it.
yeah. When in reality,
Uh,
it's just the first step towards it being it.
I had 5 books like that in limbo. One of them was nominated for a National Book Award. 3 of them all made it into print elsewhere, including that one. So, it was so frustrating. I was laid off. It was a time when there were a lot of layoffs in publishing, and
Mhm.
I eventually left my editorial ambitions aside, and I spent a fair amount of time learning about production. So, I've decent production chops myself, but it makes me a better. Um,
Publisher.
I'm better. at contracting freelancers than not, because
Yeah.
the
What would you say
tools.
is the most important thing you had to learn to become your own publisher?
Hmm. Um, how to solicit a very diverse group of people to get what you need.
Mm,
You I mean, I'm constantly on the phone talking to people who are expert in one field or another. And fortunately, after I left New York publishing, I was in more academic publishing in
mhm.
Chicago for a while. And so I've contacts and here and there. I know who's a good copy editor, and I know who can proofread and won't charge me an arm and a leg for it.
Yeah.
So it's I think the hardest thing is probably stating knowing what you want, knowing what you want.
Mm.
Um, in my network, I have a seriously good branding expert. I mean, you wouldn't necessarily know it. I'm just trying to get the ball rolling, right, and keep
Well,
it going
you've
in
got
the
to,
right direction.
just looking at like the, your logo and the way things are written, it's, nicely distinctive. It's not too busy. My wife's a graphic designer, so this
Hmm.
comes up a lot when she's looking at other people's stuff. It's like, you can't read that, or, something like that. This is nice and readable. It is, identifiable as your brand. So it works.
Well, good. The branding expert I have, and we do this periodically, and it guides pretty much everything. My editorial decisions are sort of come out of where we see the press going.
Mhm,
We do want to keep it fresh. It's really important to know where you've been.
mhm.
Uh, that's we're just still in our, I guess 2019 is when we start properly. So we're still in our infancy, but yeah, knowing where we've been is really important. We're about to do some rebranding. I don't think that, it's not like retail rebranding where,
Yeah.
storefront changes, it's more of an internal thing to, it guides me. Um, it Pilum is not just me. I mean, I'm probably the public face of it for better or worse, but we have publishers in Washington State, Kentucky, and where else? In Pennsylvania. So
Nobody in Canada yet, huh?
no, unfortunately. I have a freelancer in Canada, a couple of them, I think, but um,
Uh,
yeah.
well,
I
well,
wish
if ever you
Kevin
do,
Winkles.
if ever
Kevin
you do manage
Winkles.
to get, if ever you do manage to get someone up here, let me know. Save me on the shipping costs.
Yeah, yeah, for sure, for sure.
uh,
So I don't know how well that answers it. This is kind of a nebulous answer to your
it's a
your
nebulous answer,
question.
but it does answer it. I mean, being able, one thing I wanted to ask you is like, how you go about, assembling one of these, primarily most of the books that you've done so far, there have been a couple of novels, but it's mostly been anthologies, such as, for instance, this one, The Penultimate Men, that you did. There's
Yeah,
also The Well of Ore behind you, and the current one, Death Flex, which is also an anthology.
yeah. Let's see if I'll read it.
Yeah, right there, that one.
Where did I put my copy? No, I have the only copy of Deathflex right now, but
Nice.
oops,
That looks
right.
cool. Yeah.
So
So, what goes into creating an anthology of short stories compared to, so for instance, a novel like Shagduk or
well, I it takes us about, I think, about 18 months to do these things from the writing through the production.
mm,
I've I've come up with a theme, and either solicited material that's, not everything in Deathflex has a very precise theme. Um, it most of the fictions therein come from the memoir of Franz Schmidt, who was the headsman of Nuremberg in the 15th century. He wrote this very laconic description of his career.
yeah,
Um,
like today. executed so and so who committed this crime. They said this as they died
Well,
at
what
lunch.
it's full of detail that it is just if you're a writer, you can't leave it alone. You're
Yeah.
immediately involved in it.
Yeah, it's like
Uh,
this perfect little. It's like the one line. It's perfect little one line to get your imagination going, and like, okay, I could do something with this.
well, I was telling you earlier that there are bits of odd language or what make my ears go pointy. The language that Schmidt uses is beheaded as a favor, right? So,
Oh, that is just that just leaves things open to interpretation so delicious a way right there. It's like
well,
beheaded
of
as a
course.
favor. Okay, what did he do and what was he up for that chopping your head off is considered a favor?
Well, you've got to read Brian Renninger's story called 31 Blows,
Which is
which,
I that was the first one of the from the manuscript that you sent me for to check out before this. I like
yeah.
that one a lot. That one was cool. I will say the reference to a certain Puritan in that was just like, oh, this guy knows what I like.
Well, good. I don't, I'm not
I
a
know my
master.
Solomon Kane references when I see them,
Oh,
but
yeah, right. Sure, sure. There's, I encourage us, I encourage writers to drop Easter eggs and whatnot. I mean, we're we're doing a lot of fun here, but
oh yeah,
the anthology is about our brand. It's about trying to uh, put some energy back into the scene. I'm a big fan of Patrick Alexander's. I always say Sursova.
Kurosawa, yeah.
Other people,
I, I like the hard C's when it comes to Latin, so
Sursova is what my Italian soul wants to call it, but I haven't heard
yeah.
anyone say that
I
yet.
have
So,
Germanic ancestry, so
oh,
I
okay.
mean, literally.
Yeah. Well, okay. Well, there you are.
That's on my mom's
Um,
side, but yeah, just saw that. Yeah. No, his
but
got some. He's gotten. I mean, that's like Kurosawa is where I've met Sky Hernstrom's stories first
mhm.
time, but also a whole bunch of other stuff. That he's got a really, really, really good selection of stuff in that collections
Yeah, well, he
magazine.
publishes quarterly,
Mhm.
and I mean, runs circles around me in terms of production. He's always got something. I believe he has something funding now from a friend of ours, Misha Burnett, a
Yeah.
collection called Small Worlds. So there's it's nice because even within our niche, no one has to be king. There's enough good writing to go around.
Yeah, which is nice.
And there's enough energy to go around as well. So
Yeah, and enough variety to go around too, because neither you nor Kurosawa are really, or many other of the different, zines or collections out there, publishers out there are focusing essentially on a single kind of genre. Just in, for instance, Death Flex, you have not just stuff that's directly in that 1500s period that you reference, but also stuff
that's
from
right.
further on. There's one of the stories in there is a detective story in the modern day that is kind of related in a certain way to a curse that one condemned prisoner or condemned man uttered against his judge as he was being executed by the Schmidt in the 1500s. And that
That
served as the launching pad for something completely different from anything else in the anthology.
that's from John Dacre. He's a Sursova veteran.
Mhm.
I believe he's published 2 or 3 stories with them. Yeah, he has. I think one of the things that's distinctive about our offerings is that there's a pretty good sense of humor running around. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of. I think someone I believe Renninger on Twitter today said something. It's not grim dark, it's grim fun. Um,
There we go.
of course, his story is insanely grim, and I worry about his sense of fun.
Yeah, let's see.
But
His story, Rangers was what was it called?
31 blows.
Ah, yeah, that was the one. Yeah, 31 Blows by Brian Ranger. There was another one also, Maledicta by Lester Glover. That one was
Mm,
pretty cool. Comes right after a little essay on called "What Kind of Artist is Jack Vance?" And I think that was well placed in order because that one, the language in that one just uh, very Vancian. I think that one, it had that feel to it that I enjoy quite a bit from that author.
Oh, Paul Rhodes's essay.
Yeah, well, Paul Rhodes wrote the essay, but the story Maledicta that came right after by
Oh,
Lester
oh,
Glover.
yeah. There's a lot of Vance in Glover's work,
Hmm.
for sure. I think that, it risks even being a pastiche, but what are we doing here? Are we actually publishing books that we're going to sell, or are we going to, you know, get on our high horse about pastiche? Um,
Yeah, I
I
mean,
think,
I would
if
call it
someone
more
sends if
past. Yeah,
someone sends you a competent Jack Vance pastiche, publish it.
yeah, and then again, it's not directly referencing any of his actual universes or anything like that. It's not taking place in the
No,
Dying Earth or anything like that. It doesn't include his characters. So really, it's just something done in a similar voice, which is a voice I happen to enjoy reading. So you're gonna get no complaints out of me.
there's some good hectoring in it.
Oh yeah.
I appreciate that. Glover's a Canadian, by the way, so
Oh well, good for him. We'll try
um,
not to hold it against him.
and let's see, rounding this up, Rhodes really deserves. You'll be seeing more from Rhodes. He published a volume which is almost impossible to find,
Mm.
called Winged Being, which is a collection of his essays on Jack Vance. And he came to me really rather roundabout. One day I got up and I was wondering about something in Vance. I've over the years, I've probably read three-quarters of Jack Vance from the time I was, 14 or
Mm.
something like that. But I don't, I've read a lot since then, and I don't have a kind of critical vision that anyway, I forget what the question was, but I wanted to read some criticism about Vance, and I really couldn't find very much of it at all.
Mm.
Uh, you know, looking through libraries here and there, and I came across Paul Rhodes's name, um, and did some internet searching, and found an artist named Paul Rhodes who uh, does videos on YouTube. Okay, well, let's see this. And so he's kind of an extraordinary person. I don't know if Paul is dyslexic or he has terrible trouble with spelling. Uh, the sentences he writes are fantastic, but to look at them, you would never know that it was an educated person who wrote them.
They need to be decoded a bit before they're
Oh
really
yeah,
fully appreciable.
well, fortunately, there's YouTube, and he gives these sort of free form talks on art. He's a painter, and he's associated with a community of painters, and they talk the way painters do. In graduate school, for me, the only refuge I really had to talk about art was to actually go talk to painters. That's that's who I learned about art from,
Mm.
in graduate school. I wasn't a happy camper in the workshops. So anyway, that reminded me of Paul's discourse on YouTube. Sort of took me back to that. Now I was looking at one of his videos, and he's sitting in a garden uh, behind his house, and I was looking at the trees. It's like, oh, those are poplar trees, and gee whiz, they really look like they're in France, um, which is where I am. And yes, I wrote him, and I said something stupid like that. Do you happen to be in France? It's like, yeah, well, I live on the other side of Saumur, which is, I said, it's like an hour away from me.
Oh, that's lucky.
So yeah, so we sent some messages back and forth, and turns out that this is the Paul Rhodes who did the Vance Integral edition. I don't know if you heard about this, but I believe it was in the mid-aughts,
Hmm.
Paul and the same kind of dispersed team that makes Pilum run got together, re-edited Vance's entire oeuvre and republished it in fine
Nice.
press editions. you can find the Vance VIE for sale. It's like, I don't know, some exorbitant sum. I
I
think they
imagine.
sold it for like $6,000
Ooh,
for
that's
the whole
yeah,
thing.
that's a bit too rich for my blood.
Yeah, but now it's probably 15 or 20.
Okay.
It's just a wonderful job of publishing. Anyway, that was Paul. He was the editor behind that. So, we were, you know, sort of the same stripe. And here we are, both in Western France. And so I said, well, come on up to the house. And so we hung out for a while and talked about Jack. And Paul was very good friends with Jack Vance and lived with him for a while.
Really?
Yeah, in California. And whenever Jack was in France, he squired him around the country.
Hmm.
If you've read your Vance, you know that this is a francophone of the first order. I
Oh
don't
yeah,
know
well,
how well he
Lyonnaise.
spoke, but he really does know the language, and
Yeah.
a lot of his Lexis comes from French. But
Je sais pas s'il pouvait parler français, mais il connaissait la langue.
oh, profondément, je dirais, profondément.
I mean, come on, I'm in Quebec. I had to throw some French in there somehow.
Ah, mais oui, si tu veux continuer en français, mais
Well, no, let's keep this international. Let's keep this for the global audience.
um, and anyway, so we had this very nice conversation about it, and he says, "Well, I've sort of written a book." Oh, a book. And whenever someone tells me that, I'm always very neutral because you don't know how much they have invested in it, and
Mhm.
you don't know how good it is, and you. So he passed it over the table to me, and I got past the first predicate clause, no problem, and just started almost stopped talking to him because the book is so good. Anyhow, this essay in Deathflex is called "What Kind of Artist is Jack Vance?" And this is a really central question to what I want to do as a publisher. Let me ask you that. What do you think? What's the answer to that, Bastien?
Paints with words.
Okay, so
That's the first thing that pops into my mind. It's like the guy used language the way a painter uses paint. He creates landscapes and creates characters within them, but they're part of it. It's
sure.
like, so that you listen to something like, Kugel the Clever, doing his thing and being a complete bastard throughout, but, still lovable by the end of it and finally getting his comeuppance at the end. Or, Rialto the Magnificent or any of these other characters and like that. And you have this sense of there's a certain, like poetry to the world. Even, when bad things are happening or strange things are happening, they're all, described matter-of-factly but lovingly, if that makes any sense.
That's a nice description of his style.
Yeah.
I think you'll really if you haven't gotten to this essay, you should take a look at it because
Mm.
it's I think you're right on the money. But
Yeah.
what I
Well,
what
no,
I
I did read it. He mentions like that the difference between the realist art style versus what Vance is doing, where realism is like it very much like it's basically the grim dark of its day. Ultimately, it's like yeah, this is real. It's dark. It's good. God, I'm edgy.
yeah
Yeah, I'm not a fan of the grim dark personally. It's just not my thing.
well I don't know I mean. I think anything can edge into sentiment, especially once a writer realizes they can write a certain kind of book.
Mm-hmm.
And we're having this conversation on the evening for me, but in the morning that Cormac McCarthy died.
Mm-hmm.
McCarthy died earlier today. Uh, who, whatever else one might say about his work, that he was certainly the among the best living stylists in English.
Yeah, I've got the
Without
road,
doubt.
yeah, the road on my library. It's not, something I'll read every day, but it's definitely, something that I'll read every now and then.
Oh, I can't. It's too crippling. I mean, it is just too, it's too emotionally brutal for me to go back into very much. I've read it 2 or 3 times, I guess, but
Mm,
it takes me too long to come out of it and find my bearings again. His style is so strong. Vance is that way as well.
yeah.
It takes. I came back to Vance via Sky, right? So we have this conversation at 2019, 2020. Hey, do you want to publish Dune's Vision? And, well, who do you like? Vance. Okay, yeah, I remember Jack Vance. I like him. Um, I haven't read him in years, so I read him again. And I was really vexed because, here was a science fiction fantasy writer, and he's using words that I think he's making up. you know, I'm not. I have very good vocabulary in English, and it takes a lot before
Yeah.
you can put one over on me. I mean, McCarthy could. I mean, what the hell is that? And you get out the dictionary, you get out the Oxford dictionary, and because that's the only place you're going to find the meaning of the word. It will be perfectly employed in either McCarthy or Vance. But I was just shocked at how good his vocabulary is,
Yeah.
and his lexical reach is just of the first water. I mean, he is as good or better than Michael Ondaatje. I don't know. Is he living in Canada now? Now, see, you've distracted me with
Well, that is what Canada
Michael
does.
Ondaatje. Michael Ondaatje, if you don't remember, I believe he's won a Booker. He wrote The English Patient, and began his career as a poet, and wrote a wonderful book called Coming Through Slaughter. But anyway, if you come from literary fiction like I do, there's a certain amount of caution that arises when you pick up something that you read when you were 14. Is it really as good as you remember?
Mm.
No, it was a lot better. It
Because
was a
now you
lot.
finally have the experience required to appreciate it fully.
It's more that I've done enough reading, and I have a more fully informed spectrum of what's good and
Mm.
what's not.
Yeah. Your
Uh,
palate has improved.
for sure, it's educated.
Mm.
It's been educated, as
Yeah.
we see French. But the oh, this all began with my question. It's like, well, what kind of artist do you think Jack Vance is? And you know, uh, you described his style, which is a nice dodge, because you get around to talking about nice things. But I wonder, because I asked that question because I know what Vance's answer was, and when he was always interviewed as and understood by the marketplace as a science fiction writer, which is of course a terrible demotion, even maintaining respect for science fiction.
Mm.
Um, the thing that I really want to tease out is that kind of writing, and it's not just in popular genre fiction. The publishers and the people associated with Pilum were always talking about books and pushing things on one another, and you know privately posting really bad takes about wonderful books. And it's been a lot of fun. I had been reminded by one of our writers, John Fowles, who wrote a book called The Magus, um, who also, you may remember the title of the movie, The French Lieutenant's Woman.
Mhm.
He wrote that. I hadn't really paid much attention. I mean, he was on my radar, and he was someone I would have pretended at a cocktail party to have read, and knew enough how to fake it.
Oh.
He's like, oh yeah, sure. So that crazy book about the Satanist or whatever. Yeah. But I actually read it, and it's tremendous. But there are books that don't fit into categories, and they're
Yeah.
profoundly well imagined books, like all of Vance's books are. They're his critical reception is just criminal. And so I'll be very proud to publish a new edition of Paul Rhodes's book.
Nice.
It's a perfect opportunity because it just needs enough editing where I can feel like I actually did something here. His arguments are beyond me.
Yeah, it's just a question of presentation at that point.
It's how do I make them more effective? How do I improve the rhetoric? How do we bring the beats home so that even the people in the cheap seats feel it? And that's of course is a critical work, but that's my tack with fiction as well.
Yeah.
So there are other writers. I would like to build something that is going to drive imaginative fiction or speculative fiction. I think in some of our marketing copy, we talk about like freak wave science fiction, whatever that might mean to you. I think I came up with that. It was me and not someone else. There was a comic in mid 80s called Freak Wave that I remember being very taken with. It's about this windsurfer during the apocalypse.
I mean, if the apocalypse hits, you're gonna need a hobby anyway. So
well, yeah, he goes around the world on his sailboard. So, but anyway, there are lots of writers who are. Have you ever heard of a fellow named Steve Erickson?
The name is familiar. Steve Erickson.
He wrote his first novel was called Days Between Stations. It's in 1985. He wrote another book called Rubicon Beach. He wrote another Tours of the Black Clock, maybe got some press. Anyway, he's
Zeroville in 2007. His last one was Shadow Bond in 2017.
He's a
other things.
Very interesting writer who has received almost no attention, despite being, his first books were acquired by Vintage Contemporaries, and they were some of the first Vintage Contemporaries as well. And I remember reading Days Between Stations, and just being, people talk about escapism, and there's lots of, especially within the independent writing space, lots of defenses of escapism, especially during the pandemic, et cetera. There's this whole, within those circles, a whole re-examination of what escapism means.
Yeah, and its value.
Yeah, well, particularly that it's been devalued to a point. The only sorts of escapism are, like the eat, pray, love sort. Men
Sorry,
don't.
I just broke out into hives.
Well, yeah, I don't blame you, but that's been working since the late 80s. That brand of literary fiction, which is sui generis now. You cannot get away from it. Walk into any bookstore and you're going to get hit with a particular palette of colors. You're going to get hit with a particular style of writing. Of course, Sex and the City supercharged it.
Yeah.
The net effect is that, outside of our niches, right? So, heavy metal, sword and sorcery, guys are still reading that. And what's happened while the people who run the show are waiting for us to die, and they're quite upfront about it. I mean, I remember seeing some glib young writer holding up, I forget where it was. It might have been at MLA. She was photographed holding up a sheet of paper saying, be quiet while while we suffocate you, or but it stuck with me. I'll see if I can find the person, but it was someone who obviously had cornered the editorial market as it was back then. And it's even
Disgraceful.
worse now. It's even worse now.
Utterly disgraceful.
I don't live in the States. There's a lot of in France, there's a lot of state support in publishing, as I expect there might be in Canada as well. So
Mm.
when you go into a bookstore, variety exists, serious books exist. Uh, it is nothing. I mean, the last time I went through an airport was really a revelation. At the airport book offerings, there's 6 books in the whole place, and that's it.
Yeah.
But in
I
none
still
of them,
remember being able to go to like a drugstore, like a pharmacie somewhere, just going to the book rack and finding like, there was some Zelazny there, or, just like
who
random,
knows?
like, uh,
It didn't all have to be perfect, did it?
no,
It
it was
just
just
had
like
to.
a little spin rack full of old paperbacks, and, like you can get them for like $5 at the most.
Sure, sure. Well, I mean, we're coming out of that. I mean, there's a it's a terrible disease. There's a whole long theory about why it was Terry Brooks who caused this cataclysm. Terry Brooks, who wrote The Sword of Shannara,
Mm.
but it picked up in amplitude, and it, to the point where pretty much, my friends, my male friends, do not read fiction. They just don't.
Mm.
Um, it's a damn pity, of
Agreed.
course. We're not, that's not to say that we're pitching our books toward men or that we only publish men. That's the case so far. Um, but there's a readership. I'm interested in that readership that wants a deeply imagined book that isn't a commodity good, for whatever, Thursday book club or something like that.
Yeah.
Although I say that, and I believe Shagduck has made its way into book clubs as well. Jackson is really quite
Yeah.
an adept infiltrator. So
Well, yeah, I mean, having spoken to the guy, previously on this channel, yeah, for that book, I can see how that would work, because it is like it takes almost elements of that literary fiction, because it is taking place in, a real world time and place, real ordinary world. What was that? I think it was written on your website's blog. If you can take magic and make it ordinary, why can't you take ordinary and make it magical? And
hmm.
that's pretty much what Shagdog does, but it starts out normal, just normal diary entries from this librarian in, 70s Texas, and it turns into, by the end of it, this like, where is this going kind of,
Yeah.
thing. He's
Well,
also has a story in the new anthology as well.
yeah, it's tremendous too.
Mhm.
I never, I solicited something from him, and I sort of described the project, and I'd spent, probably what, better part of a year editing Shagduck, and so I was into it hammer and tongs, and I know how that style works. I know the sorts of moves he makes, and Jackson comes back to me with something that is completely different. I have no idea. Every now and then that happens.
That's a sign of a good writer right there.
Oh my goodness, I don't know what happened there, but he didn't get in the way of whatever was happening. He just wrote it down. I can't wait to hear him talk about uh, his story in there. It's called Der Schleim. What is it exactly? Der Schleim, the
Der
interrogation.
Schleim. Yeah, it's called
Inquisition of Der
yeah,
Schleim.
the Inquisition of Der Schleim. Yeah.
But it is really something, and again, something again. I don't, no, I don't say, if you're a fan of Shagduck, you'll be a fan of this story. I don't know that you would necessarily be, but it's just astounding.
Yeah,
He
and it's damn
he
entertaining too, so there's that.
he and Renninger have both taken on force from somewhere. I don't know where, but that this is, of the 3 books, this one's my favorite. Um, Partly because of how much stronger they came back to the page.
Mm.
Renninger is really someone to watch. This, I guess it was last week, he had a piece up on IM 1776 about boulderization. You see, the revision of texts.
Yeah.
You know, people who control IP. Back in the day, we used to say copyright. Are monkeying around with them for reasons of political correctness, and I don't know why. They're not going to sell any better. They're not going to sell any more library copies. It's
Especially when
just
people realize it's different from the original. There's stuff missing. They're gonna want to go, oh, I wonder what they took out. Let's go get the original.
it's so gratuitous. It's just so gratuitous. But there you are. I mean, partly that's, I've been asked many times, do you have ebooks? We have a couple of ebooks. I really resist doing it, partly because marking them up is a real pain. But I don't know, Amazon, the first book they monkeyed around with was 1984.
Which is an irony in and of itself.
It's like, could you be a little less demonic? Just
It's
a
like,
little,
yeah. It's the equivalent of people's Kindles catching fire if they install Fahrenheit 451,
Yeah, that's very good. That's very good. That's very
Yeah.
good. That's very well said.
Thank you. It's just like, of all the ones to pick to do that, that's the one that's going to get noticed the fastest, you dumbasses.
Well, that's where we are now, and that was a test to see if anyone was watching, and the tests become just more bold as we go on. Anyway, that's one of the reasons why. I mean, I'm probably the thing I'm proudest of in the past 4 years is that we've been able to get our books picked up by Brodart, which is the library service. So a library who wants to have our books on the shelves, they can receive a library copy prepared, with the tags and whatnot.
That's good.
And that's a big thing. So it's funny too, being a publisher in a space where everyone's like, oh well, you don't need a publisher, just do it yourself. Well, yeah, certain people can do that,
but not everybody.
Yeah, not everybody, nor should they. But it's running details like that down that matter to me. So whatever frustration I have about kind of being run out of established publishing, I can get a tiny bit back. It's all, even at work, especially literary publishing, is just as much a cottage industry as any of the small presses out there.
Of course.
We were talking about McCarthy briefly before. McCarthy almost disappeared from print in I gotta say, in the late 70s. It was Bradford Morrow at Conjunctions who acquired the rights and kept him in print until he was picked up in Vintage Contemporaries. That's the kind of work that small presses can do.
It's fine work, because that's important. Like,
sure,
going back to Vance for a second, I only really knew about him going by playing D&D. If I hadn't been, a role-playing game enthusiast, I might not have actually ever run into him. I mean, I don't go to bookstores and I don't see any Jack Vance on the shelves or anything like that. It's always either the really big classics like, Tolkien, obviously, or the new stuff by various authors I've never heard of and have no real interest in reading because none of their stuff seems particularly appealing to me, or, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, well, so just keeping the stuff in existence is important, especially because Vance was published on pulp. And, I hate to say it, I'm old enough now where, things I purchased on acid paper in, the 90s
starting to fall apart.
Are starting to fall apart, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's the problem with physical media. Well, it's a problem with all media. Even digital media eventually decays because, it's got to be on something physical, and when the power goes out, you can't read it anyway. So there's that problem.
The problem with digital media, physical media can be destroyed. digital media can be hidden.
Mm,
It's very easy to obfuscate.
yeah, that's true.
Uh,
Like,
go ahead,
yeah,
please.
no, it's just like you can find old books going to an old bookstore that, you aren't in circulation anymore, that are really hard to find, but you can get lucky and just like pop into a random bookstore somewhere and just like, hey, this edition, I haven't seen this one before, or this author that I hadn't heard of in the longest time, and I found it and it's mine, and no one could take that. With digital media, if it's no longer being sold anywhere, unless somebody decide to go, yar har har, and stick it somewhere where it can be, torrented or something like that, it's gone.
Well, it's interesting because we're talking about composition earlier. Um, discovery is exciting. So finding things in a bookstore is exciting. Discovering it is exciting. Digital media to me is about acquiring the thing and stocking it somewhere.
Mm.
So, whenever I get into conversations about digital media and I get a little bit shirty about it, I'll say, well, how many unread digital editions do you have on your phone? A
Guilty.
lot. Yeah, people, it's, I don't know what the average is, but it's not one. Um, and that's true of books as well. I don't know. I mean, publishing to the physical space, it matters a lot. Uh, if you talk with Paul Rhodes for any amount of time, he'll talk about incarnation, how how the body, how intention makes it into the real world. And it's an esoteric point for a publisher, because after all, we're at a certain level, we're selling paper. Well, I'm actually helping Ingram Spark sell paper. I'm just allowing them to use my books to do it.
Yeah.
Um, and you have to look at things that way too. But they're everything can't be ephemeral. It can't be.
Yeah. And there's
You
something
know,
about a physical book that just demands you read it, like having your book just on a table right there in front of you, just like it demands you to pick it up and, just go through the pages.
well, it
Whereas
hit
you don't get the same effect with like an app.
it hit. I used to read a lot of books on my phone. I guess I still read a few, but I realized that my son was looking at me, and viewed from the exterior, I'm on Instagram. You know, uh, I can't. He can't say, Dad, what are you reading? And I can't
Mhm.
just hand it over to him.
Yeah.
Say, here, look at this. You can't browse through it the way you can with the book. So, it bugged me, and I realized that there's a real, I don't know, you get into these esoteric positions and
Yeah.
try to make them work commercially.
Well,
Uh,
with any kind of advance in technology, there's always something gained and something lost. And it's a
mm,
question of deciding, is the thing gained worth what is lost? And sometimes it's just not. Or the
I don't even
changes
know if
are,
I have an opinion on it. I'm just, when I was in publishing, there was always someone running around blabbering about multimedia. No one listened, and that person was always in marketing meetings, and it was all very complex, and you can't really understand, and it's going to be huge. It's the future, and of course, back then we're talking about multimedia CDs, right?
yeah.
Actual discs. So we're still in the physical world mostly, but it just never, it always, again, it's the autism coming back. It's like I've got to have sentences to read. I've got to have pages to turn. I've got to feel the weight of the the recto pages going over to the verso side. That's how I know I'm finishing the book, because it's getting
Mm.
lighter on the right side.
And then that
uh,
satisfying clap as you close the cover at the
yeah,
end.
yeah, yeah. So anyway, that's I don't know. I mean, I feel so old talking this way, but it's it's a guiding instinct.
Mm.
It it's one that that I think is important. Um,
Yeah. I
just
mean,
judging by the quality of what's written since I left, it hasn't gotten better. I mean, it really hasn't.
yeah, barring a few rare exceptions. I mean, what's
Uh,
Sturgeon's? Remember, we always have to remember Sturgeon's law. 90% of everything is crap.
yeah,
So the more stuff there is, well, the more crap there's going to be.
and that's fine. You know, again, I never started out as a publisher of popular fiction. And I didn't understand those people. So, like, you know, usually when I don't understand something, I avoid it. And if I can't avoid it, then I'll, you know, sit down and study it. But
Mm,
I didn't get it. I didn't get it. I'm not sure I do now. But when you go back and you look at popular writing or writing that passed for popular writing in the day, uh, and you see how well it was put together, and there's just nothing like that now. Uh, you know, my old boss used to talk about, he would say he had two rants. He had one about the death of syntax, and then he had another one about the death of grammar.
oof. He's not
And
wrong there.
we're heavily into the latter. Um, it, 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 it astounds me. I don't even understand why people buy some of the things they do, except to say that they've bought it. That's certainly true, you know, when we're talking about culture conf of whatever stripe.
Mhm.
Uh, you know, it's like, well, I got this, and to an extent, that's what we're, you know, we're by necessity we do things crowdfund, you know, but my ears are open. I've got big ears. You know, let's find another way to do it, and we'll do it.
Yeah.
Um, but for now, this is it. So, I mean, it's good in another way because it's exciting because there's a community that is that terrible word. I have Ibsen's view of community, but there is something that is coming out of atomization, all these terrible tropes that are running around on the murderous social media.
Mhm.
Like minds are coming together. And it's, I mentioned earlier Renninger's piece on I Am 1776. We've got an I Am 1776 writer in Deathflex, Alexandra Palacio,
Mhm.
who has a terrific story. Again, not particularly science fiction or fantasy.
Yeah.
Um,
Ingenue. Ingenue.
Ingenue.
Ingenue. Yeah. That's the
So,
second story in the collection. That one was, it started out a particular way and it went in directions that I do not know quite exactly where they went, but I liked where they went. That was an odd story to read. It's like, okay, where's this going? Okay, I think I know where this is going. And no, this is different. What's going on? What the heck? I was like,
well, let me ask you that. How important is it that you know the solution to a
not
fiction?
particularly, I find. Well, it depends on the story. If it's something like, I'm reading something that's advertising itself as, grounded and, this is, like a procedural or something like that, then yeah, it makes having things like fit together very well kind of, is important. But
Sure.
if the story doesn't bring it with it any other particular kind of, expectations, then I'm
Hmm.
far more likely just to, like, go with it. And
Hmm.
since, I was expecting something fantastical, it certainly went fantastical, not in a way that I was expecting, but not in a way that, what's the line these days is subverted expectations. It did not
Sure.
subvert any expectations. It exceeded expectations.
Okay.
Because one of my expectations for it to be good, so you start subverting, that's one of the first ones that gets done. Typically,
Well,
in any case.
yeah, I don't know. I see what you're saying about procedural,
Yeah.
you know, like crime novels or what. That's part of the gratification. That's it's written on the tin, as they say.
Yeah.
Uh, I think that probably, you know, the best popular fiction always comes off in some really gratifying way. Uh, what we're doing an anthology, and in spite of my gray hair and everyone else's gray hair,
including
a
mine.
lot, a lot of us are just beginning. So, there's that idea too. I mean, we do the New Voices. It's called the New Voices edition for a reason. So these aren't established writers who, but some of them, Sky is definitely, you
At
know,
this
you,
point, yeah,
you won't believe his next book. I mean, I don't.
challenge
Um,
accepted.
it, it's it's wonderful, but and Sky generally does, bring things around. But for me, I don't know. I mean, it's sufficient that it be off center a lot of times. It's not totally sufficient, but it's better if it is. I think I don't know who's responsible for it. Probably Hemingway. This desire for a completed metaphor. Um, and I'm thinking of people. As I get older, I think more about writers like William Burroughs.
Mm,
I think about William Burroughs' protege, a guy named David Oley, who's just a genius. He wrote a book called Motorman, and years later wrote a sequel to it. Um, these are books. These are writers of sheer imagination, sheer weirdness.
indeed. Well,
And
yeah. I mean, going through Naked Lunch one time, it was just like, oh boy, it's just like, wow. This you could tell this guy was on all the drugs, like all of them, including a few that don't
until
exist.
until very recently, you were able to uh, find that strain in American letters.
Mm,
Maybe Chuck Palahniuk is the last person who really, with Fight Club, who was able to inhabit that mode. Men read that book; they still do.
hmm
There's audacity in it. There is almost no audacity in, when I have my people. I'm stuck in France, right? So I have my people. They go out. You go into the bookstore today. Take some pictures of the shelves. I want to see what's going on with graphic design. I want to see, what's faced
Mm,
out, what's not. Used to do this, when you work in New York and you're in publishing, it's
yeah,
really fascinating to see, to be in the office where the book actually gets put together, and
yeah,
then
and see
go
what the
down,
trends are, and
yeah, go down to Barnes and Noble on Fifth Avenue and see where it actually ends up. I don't even know if Barnes and Noble is still on Fifth Avenue, but well, there you are. Oh, we're going down to the bookstore. Um, Bring your cane and your spectacles. Uh, but there was a weirdness and energy that got ridden out
Mm,
um, in the 90s, and it wasn't so much censored as it was just supplanted. The
mm.
way we do that now, it's just oh well, here's all these books that we can sell in the Eat, Pray, Love category, and it just
Mm.
boom,
And it just
all
grows and
across.
grows and grows and takes up space from other things.
There aren't editors. Even when I was editing, there weren't editors in, you know, people think of, Albert Erskine or Maxwell Perkins, New Yorker. Uh, you know, you palled around with writers, and you talked about writing, and you encouraged them and discouraged them sometimes, and you were a sounding board. You were definitely a gatekeeper,
Mm,
but you also did get stuff in. You did help in the production of things. That was already on the way out in a big way. Um, editing became Editing like that became an impediment to publishing in the mid 90s, and all of those functions were taken up by agents.
mm.
And at the
And it's
time,
just not the same thing anymore.
it is and it isn't. I mean, not all agents are bad. uh, I think in literary fiction, I think there's only a very small handful, literally, four or five, who have any sense whatsoever about uh, the import of a new literary title. Of course, literary titles, they sell between 200 and 1,000 copies. Yeah, so
Yeah.
you can get pretty, you know,
The
why
definition
is
of a smash success
yeah.
is, relative.
Right, you sell out your first print run of 3,000 and maybe get into a second, right?
Yeah.
I'm talking like that, but for us a big success is selling 100 copies. And that's why that's why I go out and talk about what we're doing, because it's our Kickstarter ain't, well, excuse me, our Indiegogo, I hate having to talk this way, our crowdfund uh, could use a little help.
Well,
uh,
that's one of the reasons I, have you on, because A, I'm always willing to help. Two, you provide me with stuff that I actually enjoy reading. So there's
yeah,
that.
well,
And three, you obviously have a passion for, not just, genre fiction, but, creating imaginative fiction in general. So, I think that's well worth
oh yeah.
encouraging.
Well, I think it's rare, and I think it's worthwhile,
Damn right.
and that's where I am.
Yeah. Where I am is having to get ready to go to work pretty soon.
All
So
right.
we're going to start wrapping things up. Where can people reach you if they want to know more about Pilum Press?
Well, pilumpress.com. I'll certainly, you have the links.
Yeah. Everything will be in the description below,
Yeah.
as well as a link to the Indiegogo crowdfunding for the Death Flex.
Yep.
Yeah.
So,
And that's still got a couple of days left on it, so everybody get on that. We want to see this stuff get published lickety split, so as they say in the biz. Do they actually say that in the biz? I don't know if they say that in the biz.
I don't know, but it sounds like we should. It sounds like something from His Girl Friday. So
Yeah.
everyone has great respect for that film.
Yeah. This Neal Durando, he's a good egg. This has
Oh, also so.
so sir. This has been Neal Durando of Pilum Press. I have been Zero Sum. Go give this guy some money. Go give it. I always hate that how this thing gets reversed. Go give this guy some money, and I will see you all next time. Till then, from both of us, adieu.
Merci beaucoup.